Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the latest in a series of webinars being run by Echo. This morning's webinar is around cloud security and how to protect your overall infrastructure and your production environments. Paul, if you could move to the next slide, please. So my name is Mark Donnellan. I'm the commercial director here at Echo Cloud Ireland. I'm joined today by Paul Hogan, director of our MDR security, and Mikhail Skakov, director of strategy and innovation. Both Paul and Mikhail are going to take you through today's presentation. Just a couple of points to note: the session is being recorded, and the slides and the recording will be made available to you after the event, most likely tomorrow morning at this stage. As we go through the session, there will be polls. We will look for your feedback, so we'd appreciate your input. It gives us valuable insight into the topic that we're talking about, and helps, I suppose, feed the information that we provide to you as we go. Next slide, Paul. So this is the agenda. I'm going to take a minute or two to take you through an overview of Echo. Then we're going to take you through the evolving threat landscape, what that's ever changing as we see it at the moment. We're going to talk then a little bit about why traditional security solutions are no longer enough to protect your critical infrastructure. We're going to talk about the power of our managed SIEM services, our managed MDR services. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some actionable insights, so things that you can actively do to better protect yourselves against cyber threats. And then finally, we're going to open it up to questions and answers. We expect to run for about 45 minutes or so. So brief 30 seconds on Echo. I've been in the business now for almost 8 years. We're Europe's fastest growing security first cloud managed service provider. We're in 13 countries now. Ireland, the UK, and the Netherlands are our primary markets. We're doing in the region of, or we expect to finish the year in the region of about 200 million euro in revenue, and we're highly profitable. So as you can see from the slide there, we've north of 800 customers. The employees are slightly on the low side. We're now north of 1,000 employees. And I would say 80% of the staff within the organization are technically aligned across our different pillars and portfolios. Very, very strong partnerships with a lot of our vendors. So we'll talk about some of those later on today. But obviously, we look to build solutions around business outcomes. And today's business outcomes that we're going to talk to you about are how you can protect your environment and make sure that you try and stay ahead of the cyber threats that are out there in the market today. So with that in mind, I'm going to pass it over to Paul. Sorry, one other thing. Obviously, if you have any questions as we go through this, please put them into the chat box, and we'll try and answer them at the end of the presentation.
Thank you, Mark, and good morning, everyone. Look, I think I'll start with a story. Mark and myself were in with a CISO a number of weeks back, and he asked an interesting question. He said, "What would you do if you came in one morning and you could get access to nothing?" And I said, "What do you mean get access to nothing?" And he was, "Well, we've adopted a cloud-first strategy. You know, we have moved all our workloads onto Azure. This was happening with a Microsoft client. It could happen with any of the cloud providers. We use Office 365, we use Entra ID for identity, and we've developed some of our applications as cloud native." And what had happened that organization was that identities had been compromised all the way up to the top level administration, and the threat actors had gone in and locked out everyone out of that Azure tenancy, which effectively meant they locked everyone out of their ability to do any work for that organization. So that kind of brought me back to a couple of thoughts a number of years ago when people were first thinking about the move to cloud and adopting cloud. And yeah, one of the major concerns was security. And you can see in that example there, you know, if your security and your security posture isn't 100% on point, you really run the risk of introducing threats and vulnerabilities and compromising your environment. I suppose another data point is that we have an IR team, incident response team, and what we're beginning to see with that team is that more and more, and typically they get a call on Friday afternoon to say something like, I have a breach. Can you help me out here? More and more of those breaches are related to cloud environments, whether it's unsecured S3 buckets in AWS, account compromise, takeover, credential stealing, data exfiltration, whatever happens to be. More and more we're seeing that. So in the evolving threat landscape, that's kind of some of the key data points that we're seeing. But maybe if we throw it over to you guys and say, like, what are the number one threats? And we're just going to run a quick poll here. What are the number of cyber threats that you see in your cloud environment, and which ones are you worried and concerned about? So we'll give you like a minute or so just to answer that. So there's four options there. Is it cloud security misconfiguration? Is it ransomware and extortion? Is it cloud account hijacking? Is it supply chain attacks? Just as a kind of sample. So we'll see there's a number of responses in there, and you can see them on your screen. But so two of the top ones that we're seeing are cloud security misconfigurations and ransomware and extortion. I'll just leave that poll out for a second, just to let it settle down. Cloud hijacking is quite low at 14%. That's a little bit out of kilter what we're seeing, but I'll just explain that in a second. Right, so we'll just move on from that poll. So, look, as I said a second ago, what we're seeing and what we're seeing in the marketplace is cloud intrusions using compromised credentials has been increasing year on year, something like 36% last year on year. And cloud environment intrusions have increased year on year overall by about 75%. So what we're saying is that the attacks that we're seeing on organizations are more focused to their cloud environments. And kind of why is that, and what are the kind of major concerns? I suppose overall the top kind of cloud concern is data breach. So lack of losing data from cloud environments, whether it's S3 buckets in Amazon, whether it's from servers directly, whether it's through mailboxes or SharePoint or whatever it happens to be. So that's the top concern. If you look at some of the top breaches internationally, they have been related to cloud environments. That's a top concern, kind of driven by some of the other concerns we look at here. This one we see an awful lot. The kind of example I gave you a second ago around account hijacking kind of fits in here, where accounts are either hijacked, credentials are compromised, and access is somehow gained by threat actors into the environment. Initially, access could be with a low-level employee, and then through lateral movement and privilege escalation, ends up with, and in that CISO's example or CISO case, ended up with the whole domain or the whole environment being compromised. So account hijacking, using attacks such as adversary in the middle, and I'm going to go through an example of that in a second. It's something that's very, very prevalent. It leads to some of the other issues that we see here, but it's certainly is one of the doors in. This scored highly on the poll misconfiguration. So vulnerabilities and misconfiguration have been, I suppose, the bane of security defenders' lives over the years. Misconfigurations and vulnerabilities that have been patched have and continue to introduce vulnerabilities and attack avenues into environments. We probably see it more and more in cloud for two reasons. One is, the amount of options and features that the cloud providers provide are greatly enhanced from what you would have seen with some of the on-premise applications. And secondly, the pace of change in cloud environments, because the providers can develop applications, develop systems a whole lot quicker and introduce more features. Sometimes, and you might see with some of the platforms you work with, it's really hard to keep up with what's changed. Sometimes how you access something was in one menu, and now it's in a different menu, was on one screen, it's moved elsewhere, it's in a different portal. So misconfiguration and vulnerabilities continue to be a critical threat actor, particularly in cloud environments. If you look at how your environments and how you access it and how you let your clients access it, so insecure interfaces and APIs. In fact, one of the services that we see an awful lot of interest in nowadays is a thing called external attack surface management. And effectively, that's like vulnerability management on steroids for external interfaces, where we would go and we would scan your presence on the web, delivered, not only through cloud, but primarily through cloud interfaces. And we would see how insecure those interfaces are, how insecure those APIs are, how they can be compromised, and then report back on that. So I suppose the growth in that service just shows us that the amount of insecure interfaces, APIs that haven't been configured properly, is something that again we see as a good avenue in for threat actors. Everything is driven by, and I suppose we could have started this with poor strategy and architecture. If your IT security, information security is not aligned with your business and not aligned with your cloud strategy, then it's going to be very difficult to maintain a decent security posture. And how we've seen this is people very quickly, maybe through things like shadow IT, figuring out, like, I need to stand up a service or resource really quickly. Internal IT is a bit slow with it. I'll just stand something up in my own cloud environment. Or I'm trying to get something to work, something's wrong with it, and I'll just open that S3 bucket to the world just for a few minutes to see what'll happen and forget to close it, or make changes and forget that I've made those changes and introduced that. And that is all due to a misalignment of the business strategy with security, with your cloud architecture strategy. But Gav's going to cover that in a little bit more detail in a minute or two anyway. And then lastly, I suppose it's the insider and third-party threats. Again, if you look at a lot of compromise that have happened in cloud environments over the last number of years, it's been due to third parties, either third parties as contractors and suppliers, or third party related to applications and services that you might be using, which have introduced vulnerabilities and then allowed that to promulgate threat to the environment. And then the insider threat, again, insiders have, particularly with privileged accounts and privileged access management and identity management is key in all of this. But having that level of access where they can either through mistakes or misconfigurations or through insidious behavior do something to compromise the environment. So those are the kind of major threats that we see. I think it maps very nicely back to what we've seen in the poll, and those are the areas that really cause most concern. I finish off with this, and I'm going to go into an example in a second. A lot of so the major avenue in is related to stolen credentials nowadays, and people believe, well, I've got to that stage where I've turned on multi-factor authentication, so surely I should be fine. So I've turned on multi-factor authentication, but there's attacks such as this adversary in the middle attack where not only credentials are stolen, like username and password, but also session cookies are stolen, and that can lead on to anything else. So I'm going to give an example in a second where it leads on to a business email compromise. It can lead on to human operation, or as a result of human operation ransomware. It can lead on to that example we showed a second, or I talked through a second ago, where an environment was completely compromised through, stolen credentials and then escalated privileges. So here's an example of what we're kind of talking about with an adversary in the middle. So it starts off with your typical phishing email. Your phishing email directs you to a site. Unlike, I suppose, a number of years ago, where phishing sites were just, the phishers would try and replicate your site, make it look the same, and then steal credentials. With some of the tools we see now, effectively what happens is the request is proxied through to is sent to a phishing site. It's proxied through to the real site. Credentials are stolen on the phishing site, and then as an MFA authentication request is made, the session cookie goes back, and then the phishing site, which sits in the middle again, steals those credentials. So what happens is the threat actor then has access to three things: the username and password, but even more importantly, the session cookie. And then they can use that session cookie. They are now effectively logged in wherever they need to be. So they can use, in this example here, for business email compromise, go into a mailbox, find an invoice, change the payment terms in the invoice, send that out to external recipients. And from the external recipient's perspective, it's a legitimate email. It's come from someone I've been working with. I'm expecting this invoice, and I haven't noticed that maybe the payment terms have changed or bank account details have changed, or whatever it happens to be. So once the attackers have stolen those session cookies, a number of things can happen. It can be very difficult at that point to get rid of them out of the environment, because that session cookie will be alive for whatever that duration is. So changing passwords and disabling the user sometimes won't alleviate that attack. So that's an example of adversary in the middle. As I said, it can be used to fuel a lot of the other attacks and threats that we see. So if you take a step on, you can see that despite our best intentions, that the traditional security methods that we would have used, I mean, everyone's kind of definitely moved away from the position that we can have a firewall in place, and a firewall protects absolutely everything, or endpoint security protect absolutely everything. So I think we're looking at adopting a security perspective where you understand that the solutions are not enough, and you need to kind of adopt this methodology or thought process where you need to be able to predict what you think is going to happen. You need to have controls and technologies to prevent it from happening. And then you need to be able to rapidly detect and respond to threats that sometimes bypass those controls and technologies. So given that we just have a second poll here, so how confident are you in your ability to prevent those cloud security incidents? Based on, I suppose, the threats that you would have seen beforehand, the ones we've just kind of gone through there now. If any of those attacks were happening right now in your environment, would you know about them? Would you be able to defend them? Would you be able to even detect them happening in the first place? So pretty much middle of the road. A lot of people are neutral. About 25% are confident, 25% are concerned, about 7% are very concerned. Just leave that poll run for a little bit later. Yes, so it's pretty much a neutral position. I think people are very much, that says to me, pretty much very much in the dark around their ability to predict, prevent, detect, and respond to cloud threats. But let's explore that a little bit further. So this, I suppose, represents some of the services that Echo have, and Michael will dive into these a little bit more detail. But if you think of what you're trying to do here, you're trying to predict, prevent, detect, and respond to those threats. At the very start, you need to have what? You need to understand what your kind of current cloud security posture is, what it should be, and how to get from A to B. And the 2B state can be either industry best practices or some regulatory compliance frameworks. You need to have a rigorous testing mechanism in place that, once you've developed or once you've exposed APIs or interfaces, that you test them to ensure that they're done securely. You need to have, in this new zero trust world, you need to have the ability to protect all the way from endpoint to cloud. Attacks are multifaceted. Compromised endpoints, compromised devices leads to compromised clouds. So either look at that through a lens of everything from endpoint to cloud, or you can look at through a zero trust lens and say, I'm worried about identities. How do I protect identities on the endpoint? How do I protect it in cloud? How do I protect it on network devices? And then, if you've managed to get those three areas in place, it is how do you continuously monitor and manage your environment? And if there are threats that bypass some of those controls, how can you deal with them? How can you detect and respond to them? So you would need to have a security service 24/7 and an incident response team to be able to react to that. So at a very high level, that's the kind of approach you need to have. Michael now is going to kind of dive into, I suppose, some of the cloud services, cloud security in a little bit more detail.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks for coming. Obviously, I recognize some names here, but in general, I would like to focus on that cloud and the use cases that Paul started, right? So just kind of bring it a bit high level. What is the difference between on-prem and cloud, right? We all know cloud is here, right? It's here for a number of years. We all know we need to go there, right? To achieve the utilization, to get rid of the headaches we have in IT on upgrades and everything else. But I always kind of advise to be cautious, right? Or careful what you wish for, obviously. And my favorite kind of analogy is that you have a house with the garage where you park your car. That's your data center, right? And you are going into city now. You are buying an apartment without a garage, without a car park, and you need to use the public car park space, right? And that to me is the difference between on-prem and the cloud security. You cannot use your traditional that you have a gate, you have a door, and you have a solid roof over your car, right? You can leave anything valuable in there because it's on your premise, it's secured. It's in your, well-known area, right? Now you are parking on the public car park. You need to change the mindset. You have different factors. You have a pubs around where people obviously leave pint glasses, or you have something else there. You need to look at different vectors and mitigate against those. And also, obviously, cloud does simplify some of your IT operations. You have a lot of APIs to deploy stuff, to reduce the manual efforts and automate, right? But brings the challenges of that public car park. And that is something which people underestimate. Like, it's super easy to deploy something in a cloud. Don't get me wrong. I can download POC and I can have application running in 1 or 2 days, right? Have a POC for the management, include Power BI, show the dashboards, and kind of run with it and say, this is a great business case, let's move there, right? But then you look at the cloud way how to do this. Use private endpoints, use private DNS, make sure that the contractors are coming in a secure way, that you know where they're coming from. As Paul mentioned, identity is the key in the cloud, right? That's your only vector how you can protect yourself. And then put conditional accesses or privilege identity management or privilege access management, so you don't have same account as you open emails, to be able to scale up and scale down your environment. Those are the keys. And then obviously, once you are in the cloud, I will be very careful. What is the purpose to go there, right? Is that a fit for purpose? If you have a traditional VM architecture where you need VMs to run, I don't think the public cloud is your best use case. You probably should think about refactor it. If you are refactoring, you need to do it secure way, because as Paul said, the exposure in the cloud, especially when we run some tests and we create honeypots, and if you compare it to on-prem, right? On-prem, you might never have a DDoS attack or somebody scanning over your VMs. If you create a VM misconfiguration, which was on the poll, within the 60 seconds, there will be first pings trying to go and try to breach in with the typical admin passwords. Or if you expose your SQL server, again, to public, you don't use the private endpoints. Again, within a couple of seconds, you have the first attempt to log into your SQL servers. If you don't have the logging and monitoring, as Paul mentioned, right, enabled, then you don't even know about it, right? You're kind of walking blind. Now, discussing about the key problems and challenges, we're going to have a few more slides there, right? But I think the most important thing is to acknowledge that it's not easy, right? The cloud, even it is mature at this stage, the lack of resources and the knowledge is not there. We've seen it across the enterprises, small customers. We see some good results and good maturity, like they have a good capabilities. They do Terraform or infrastructure as a code deployment. They scan the code as they go in, but we also see some horrible stuff, and especially the simple item, right? Teams integration. You deploy some application to meet with other customers, with other colleagues, and then you look at the code of that application. It's absolute disaster. Exchanging your data into the different cloud, and it's deployed over public, and so on and so forth, right? So you need to be a bit more vigilant, right? And as I say, keep that reminder that you don't have a car park with a garage. You are parking your car on the public car park spot. And that's the different mindset. So if we move on to the next slide there, Paul, right? What we do, and again, I'm coming from the enterprise architecture background, right? So we try to look at this from the kind of governance architecture approach, and then make it more agile, so it's fit for smaller customers and customers which cannot afford an enterprise architect, or people and that kind of areas. We try to split it into what is important in a cloud from the architecture perspective, and what areas are then relevant, right? So if we go, and as I mentioned, right, the application needs to be fit for purpose for cloud. If it's not, you're probably not going to achieve the full value. The infrastructure, right, needs to be fit for purpose. It's very hard to retrofit it once the application is built. So I'm talking about the private endpoints. I'm talking about the the data security, how you deploy the application, how you update the application. Obviously, identity access management, a key, right? You should use the cloud identities and everything what's available there. Privilege access workstations for contractors and vendors. Governance and compliance, that's something which we obviously help a lot, but it's hard to retrofit. If your naming convention is wrong, if you're using different regions, which is super easy to make a mistake, suddenly you have a data in US or in Australia, that's going to take you money and effort to come back. If you don't set clear compliance kind of targets to your developers, it's going to be hard to tell them, oh yeah, by the way, what about the best practices security? And a lot of answers we hear is, oh yeah, it's secure, it's with Microsoft. Now look at the revenue stream for Microsoft security and you understand it's not, right? All the security features are in the higher SKUs. You don't get the security features in the lower SKUs, those which are usually used for the dev environments, right? API architecture and microservices. Obviously, the main reason to go to cloud, it's to be flexible, use APIs. You need to have a good strategy on that one as well. Put the WAF in front of it, put the firewall structure, so you can traverse the traffic. The worst calls we get, right, is I was breached. I got a letter from Visa or MasterCard. They will seize my services because I don't know where is the problem. Can you please analyze how big was the impact? And then we look at it and they don't even have the logging and monitoring enabled. And we're like, guys, unfortunately, you just need to say the whole thing was compromised because you don't have any zoning, you don't have any zero trust methodology, you don't know where the attacker was, right? You don't even have the logging enabled. And as Paul was saying with the account hijacking, right? That's the easiest way to go in. You pick up a phone, you ask somebody, what's your credentials? The chance with the social engineering you're going to succeed is very high. And then you don't need to really do anything else, right? You have the key to the kingdom. So that's something which obviously is always good to split. And as we can see here, the database, analytics on top of database, you can use Power BI or self-service tools, BI tools, right? But be careful. Again, we see the Power Platforms as well. There is a lot of governance and compliance issues there. People just create whatever they want. They send data to translation third-party APIs without knowing the conditions and terms of those services. Network architecture, again, segmentation is the key, right? That if you have one application or landing zone design, that you have domain control separated from everywhere else, so you are protected against all the different attacks, right? You can basically cut some segments, and those are all the benefits to do of cloud as well, right? It's very difficult to do it on-prem, but it is super easy to do it in cloud if you have a good design. Security best practice, obviously, there is a lot to talk about it, and the storage architecture. I think number one leak through the cloud is through storage accounts. Create a public storage account, misconfiguration or willingly, and then suddenly you realize that people are exchanging those. Even attacker, right? If you have a storage account which is not public, the first thing the attackers will do, okay, there is a public storage account. Let's use that to exfiltrate the data. So it's not about that they will use the easy way out, right? And the easy way out is the backdoor, which is the storage account. Okay, so obviously there are some 10 main elements of architecture and strategy. So if we look at the options, and again, as I was saying, just to kind of segue to Paul's next slide, this is not easy. To have knowledge in all these areas is not easy. Therefore, you need to pick up your battles, and we can see it across the board, right? You need to say, okay, where is my value? Where is my skill set of my team? And how we can get the rest of those capabilities, if it's directly or indirectly. And I think, Paul, that's over to you, right?
Yeah, look, thanks, Mikhail, for that. So look, what Mikhail has done there is it's kind of set the scene. you're starting out in your cloud journey, or you're in your cloud journey, you realize you need to maybe refactor, put into place an architecture that controls the technology to protect yourself, and understanding the risks and understanding how you can mitigate those. If you look at then you're in steady state. So what are the kind of security services that you need to be doing? What do you need to be doing on a kind of constant basis to ensure that you're properly protected? And if you do unfortunately happen to have a breach, that you're able to take and respond to it. So we see a number of aspects to this. So the very first piece is predict. So if you want to really get ahead of the curve, it's kind of imperative that you're able to predict understand what your attack surface is. So that'll help you predict if you are maybe possibly subject to being targeted or attacked. Are you making yourself more visible than you should be? Are you the low-hanging fruit on the internet for attackers? So the kind of services that you need to look at traditionally would have been a very basic vulnerability management service, understanding what the external surface looks like, what the vulnerabilities are, and then be able to look and mitigate those. As I said maybe earlier, that's kind of transformed now into a set of capabilities known as external attack surface management. And what that's kind of like, it's like vulnerability management on steroids. It's not quite full pen testing, although some of the products pretty much go a long way towards that. But what that does, it's continually scanning your presence, whether it's cloud-based or whether it's services that you've exposed maybe through firewalls in data centers or office locations. It looks at those vulnerabilities, tries to breach them or exploit them, and then see can that be used to gain access into your environment. So that's a really good, and if you look at these first two boxes here, that's a really good early warning system for you to understand what your posture is like. At a more mature level, it's used services like cyber threat intelligence, looking at the dark web and deep web, understanding how you would target, and if you are, who's targeting you, what are they looking at, and then based on that, what is it that you think, maybe they've identified a particular user they want to try and compromise. We can do that through identity intelligence, and maybe it's a third-party supplier they're trying to compromise. So using cyber threat intelligence is probably a very mature way of doing this, but we're saying at a most basic level, understand your external surface with vulnerability management, ideally use external attack surface management, and optimally use cyber threat intelligence. So that's the first piece. The second piece, this then would align with the strategy that Miguel would have in place, is ensure that those controls and technologies that you have in place are done in a secure, configured way. That you understand what you have in place, you understand what the configurations are. Ideally, you reduce your vulnerability surface through the first two pillars. So now you're making sure that everything's configured right, that you have the right controls in place, and that you have the right technologies to protect it. Unfortunately, and 100% protection is pretty much impossible. Well, it's not impossible, but the amount of resources that you would need to throw at it to achieve 100% protection is just doesn't make economic sense. So you must be able to, in that case, then detect and respond to threats that you see, and that's having a threat detection and response capability. And what does that mean? If you look at something like a ransomware attack, so a ransomware attack, the dwell time or the time that a threat actor could be in your environment is typically between 2 or 3 days and 3 or 4 weeks, depending on the size of the organization, depending on the complexity, how difficult it is for threat actors to move around. Now, everyone will have technology at this point in time that if you get hit with something like ransomware, it's going to tell you straight away, on my endpoint, I've got ransomware, try to protect it, it did or it didn't, block it. Key in that is, if that's what you're relying on, that's kind of 3 weeks too late. Ideally, what you're trying to do at a very early stage is detect some of the indicators that someone's trying to do something. Maybe an account has been compromised. Maybe there's phishing attacks, and certainly phishing attacks in defense is key to this. Maybe there's attacks that people are trying to do that you've seen, maybe accounts being targeted that you need to get a handle on. So the whole idea in the detect and respond piece is, as early as possible, detect what's happening and then mitigate those threats. So you can see, we're putting up a set of barriers here, a set of inverted commas firewalls. Yeah, the prediction at the very start, prevention in the middle, and if all fails, detect and respond. And detect and respond accepts that, you know, threats are going to happen. If you look at some of the products, they accept it. They understand that say, take an endpoint, for example. We understand that the endpoint protection product may sometimes fail. So we have an endpoint detect and respond product, which operates in a slightly different way, or features within the same product. So that's key. It's key that you have a policy or have an approach that relates and maps into each of those kind of areas. Moving, I suppose, well, a little bit on Echo. Marcus already talked about this. Within our security team in Ireland, there's over 250 security employees, and we run these kind of services for a lot of clients, 24/7 out of our stock, mainly in Dublin, but we do have UK and Malaysia operations as well, just for reference. So then let me just jump very quickly into MDR and SIEM. So I did say how kind of key and critical it was. Just to keep everyone on the same page, yes, it gets back to that point. Protection's not enough. You got to be able to detect and respond. And so what does that mean? This is what your environment is here. I think we had a question that came in even before the webinar started around, yeah, how does it all fit together? So I have some controls and technology. I have some detection response on endpoints. Is that just enough, or you know, how does it all fit together? Well, if you look at your environment, you're going to have identities. We've already seen how critical it is protecting those. You're going to have some infrastructure, probably on-prem or data centers. You're going to have your cloud environment, or should I say environments. You know, typically people would have started with software as a service, would have then moved to infrastructure as a service, and now sometimes using platforms as a service. That's the kind of trend that we've seen. You're going to have endpoints. So you can look at this as in two ways. From an attacker's perspective, these are ways in that we can go and compromise your environment. We can compromise your accounts. You have firewalls that are misconfigured or not patched rightly. We can compromise those. Even cloud environments that are misconfigured or exposed APIs or whatever it is, we can get our way in there. Or you have endpoints where we can run malware. We can use that to access environments. We can use that to laterally move around the place, whatever it happens to be. So you can look at that as the attack surface area for an attacker, or we can look at it as a really good rich source of information. Sorry, a rich source of information, where we can determine what the threat actors are doing and how to respond to it. Effectively, what a SIEM solution does, or an XDR solution does, is we collect and ingest logs of data and events from all those environments. We bring them into a platform. In this case, I've just shown IBM Curator, for example, but we do with multiple platforms. So we have an XDR platform, we have EDR platforms, and then we ingest with or correlate with threat and vulnerability management. And within here, this is all just technology. It's based on machine learning and artificial intelligence, as pretty much all these technologies are nowadays. And out of that, these systems will look and try and correlate activities across the various pieces. So, for example, I've seen something happening in this identity. At the same time, I've seen this happening on a mailbox, and at the same time, I've seen this happening on the endpoint. So by correlating those kind of activities, the platforms will raise an alert. The alerts then need to be detected and analyzed. A lot of this can be done automatically, but not more and more. But we do see, and there certainly is a need for SOC analysts to be able to understand some of these events, determine are they true, false, or benign positives, and then be able to act on them. And then eventually, what does that lead to? It leads to a whole set of use cases where we can look at insider threats, we can look at incident response, we can look at advanced threat detection and response. So that's the kind of generic approach for managed detection and response. It's imperative or really critical not just to look at cloud environments, but to look at all your environments, bring all that data together and analyze it, and then present it back in a way that you can react to those events. So very briefly, that's how MDR and SIEM fits into your cloud environment. I think maybe just last number of slides here to kind of summarize and wrap everything up. I think, Mikhail, you have some good actionable insights that we like to share.
Yep, and the next 3 slides will be basically going around the same topic I was already speaking about, right? And it's a different view on the same problem, right? But obviously, to have a good cloud, or when I say good cloud, right, to follow the best practice and to do the right thing and be very careful how you run it, you need to split it into 3 different, or you can look at it from different angles, right? This slide is really kind of showing you that you need to have a good management. If you don't have a strategy and governance, you're basically going blind, or you're just going application by application. In 2-3 years, you're gonna end up in complete mess, and you need to redo the whole thing again, right? So there is always good to take a bit of pause and think about, okay, how are we gonna, once you're convinced cloud is for you, right? Then you go in and say, okay, this is the skill set we have. These are the roles, these are the responsibilities. This is how we're gonna do it, and the guidelines around it, if it's internal or external, right? Because we acknowledge a lot of companies right now are kind of offshoring the projects and then deploying the cloud, right? But the differences between the companies you offshore to and their understanding what cloud means and what is the cloud security is completely different, right? And unless you tell them very clearly, you will have different level of quality returning to you, right? Then we move to the technology. When I say technology, right, what technology you're gonna use for identity? What technology you're gonna use, as Paul said, for your SIEM? What are you gonna use for network security, for firewalls, right? If you have a Palo Alto experts, it's no point to go with Microsoft firewall, right? If you have F5 capability on WAF, why would you go with WAF from Microsoft, which is not superior product to F5 capabilities, right? Think about all the different key management you need to store and exchange the keys, secret management, right? They are very, very dynamic in cloud compared to your on-prem, right? Microsoft will not allow you to have a key with expiry longer than 1 year and now. They will, for example, this year later, deny any traffic which is not modern authenticated, right? So any of those old protocols which are not encrypted will just not work in Azure, right? So then you need to go back and analyze what traffic you have and go with the flow, right? They do push on the security, but also on the newer models, right? So the old world where you can still run Windows 2012 with the old protocols are gone, right? If you use LDAP, I think 30th of October, it's not gonna run even when you have the traffic to Azure, right? It will not be supported. And then operation, right? Think about your team, where your core skill set are, what you can do and achieve, and then think about, okay, how can you augment the team, or how can you get rid of certain services and then simplify your operation, right? As Paul said, if it's a managed service, if it's a managed cloud service, managed security service, whatever it is, try to think about it. Okay, I know I can check, let's say, Sentinel 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, right? Okay, what about out of office hours, right? What about that, right? We have a customer which was very agile, very modern, everything infrastructure as a code, scale up, scale down, then they get compromised because they left the credentials in Terraform code. And over the weekend, right? Just over the weekend, because they had no scale up protection, they run up 800,000 euros bill. 48 hours. That's all what you need for the good crypto miners. To go in, scale up your environment. There's no protection. Azure will not stop you, right? Because that's a true cloud. It's elasticity. So think about that, right? And then always is good. I call it the personal trainer type of approach. If you think that you are good, then let's just kind of go in and say, okay, tell me I'm so good, right? Or tell me where I'm doing mistakes and how I can improve and be better, right? So always good to have like a regular checks. Now, moving on, because I know we are kind of running short on time. I always prefer to go with this flow. And I see many organizations fail when they try to go from bottom and say, okay, this is the new business as usual. I always prefer to have, there is a many cloud services, and each of the cloud service needs different security approach. So you start with that kind of cloud center of excellence. Doesn't need to be a big initiative, right? Where your dev guys go in and explore and say, okay, this is cool, I want to use this. Then you say, okay, this is how we adapt the service in our organization. This is what it means, logic app to have a secure connection to database, and so on and so forth. And then you slowly transition and increase your operational maturity, you can see on the left side. And you build the knowledge as you go, and then it becomes your business as usual, your DevOps, your clear, agile, and modern platform for your business, right? It's gonna take some time. If you take shortcuts, you usually fail. Just that's my kind of real advice here. And moving on to the last piece, which again different view on the same problem. It's the operating model, right? Paul, can you? Yeah. So it's the operating model, right? As I was saying, what does it fit? What does it fit for you, right? I've seen many implementation when Big Four came in and say, okay, this is how you should adapt to cloud, or and then they left. The guys had no clue how to do it. They had no idea how to support it, and then in 2 or 3 years they need to start again, right? It kind of was not a soft landing, right? So think about how it's going to work for your team, right? What capabilities you have, what capabilities you are missing, how can you augment it, right? If you don't have a governance, okay, how do you name those resources? How do you know you should stay in a certain region? And think about the strategy, the tools you need, and the skill set you have, right? You probably don't need a huge team, right? This could be done in very agile, small teams. But think about, okay, what about the backups and restore, right? What about the site recovery? What if the one region goes down, which is very low probability. But again, for some compliance, you need to have that. You need to show the use case where you fail over. So that's my kind of very high level message. It is hard. It's going to take a lot of effort and different mentality to succeed here. Paul, over to you.
Yeah, look, thanks for that, Mikhail. Yeah, look, I suppose to sum up and some of the key takeaways, like the first one, you must be prepared. Mikhail has gone through there, the kind of requirement to have, your cloud strategy, an integrated security strategy, aligned with your business strategy, and that's kind of key. If you start off with having the right posture in place, with the right approach in place, that's going to take you a long way in the journey. Secondly, when you have that in place, it's ensure that you have the controls and technologies that map to that strategy and deliver on it. And you have, as Mikhail said, the operating model, with that DevOps, that DevSecOps model, to ensure that you're best positioned to protect against threats that are out there. And then finally, accepting that 100% protection is difficult and near impossible to do. Yes, you definitely want to make it a whole lot harder for threat actors to get in. But you got to accept that you need to be able to detect and respond to threats that bypass those controls technologies. And that will allow you to get ahead of an attack a whole lot earlier. Again, leverage everything from that external vulnerability posture assessment, the cyber threat intelligence, all the way through to the detect and response technologies to identify early attacks and stop them before they become more insidious. So those are I suppose the three kind of key takeaways that map back to the overall, I suppose, agenda of the webinar. I just throw back to you, Mark.
Great, thank you, Paul. Thank you, Mikhail. Some great insights there into, I suppose, the evolving threat landscape and how difficult it can be to protect yourself against some of these. In terms of questions, we had some questions come in during the webinar, and we had a couple that came in beforehand. We'll try and address some of them now. I don't think we'll get to all of them. Maybe, Paul, we'll go to you for this one, if that's okay. How do you see the convergence between traditional, sorry, it's disappeared there now. How do you see the convergence between traditional SOC services and endpoint security provider platforms such as CrowdStrike and SentinelOne, especially as the unified platforms are capable of ingesting other telemetry?
Yeah, look, that's a great question, Mark, and I suppose it depends on where you're starting from. So, if you looked at traditional, I suppose, SIEM vendors, they would have started off with, say, we'll take in, network and firewall logs, etc. Then we'll ingest that with server logs, and we'll ingest that maybe with endpoint logs. So the approach was you take all those logs in, you run analytics on top of it. And that's managed SIEM. If you take where some of the EDR providers would have started with, you mentioned, I think, CrowdStrike, Central One, Sophos, Trend Micro, their approach would have started with the endpoint, and then after the endpoint, see where are other sources where we can get data in. So let's take it in from cloud and identity as well. Effectively, you're ending up at the same point in time. You're ending up with, and this is where you should be. And when you look to compare and contrast those, you're looking at having a platform that's able to ingest logs and events from on-premise, which is important, from endpoint services, and then from cloud services. That brings it into the one place that normalizes it. That's the first piece. Secondly, that can run the analytics on it, that can correlate the events between the various pieces, and then eventually raise incidents or offenses to be able to act on. So neither strategy is wrong. You just need to ensure that, when you look at a vendor that is moving, say, from an EDR space into an XDR or managed SIEM type environment, that they have the same kind of capabilities that you would have seen from your traditional SIEM vendors.
Great, thanks for that. Mikhail, this one's for you. I would suggest it's more around innovation. So how does Echo deal with the increased levels of cyber threats, given the reduced level of people going into, I suppose, the cybersecurity industry and the lack of overall resource in those roles?
Yeah, so that's a good question, right? And again, that's the reason why I believe everybody will be on the cloud. And the answer for that is AI, right? The attackers are now using more and more of those. There is a shortage. Even if you look at the numbers, right? The global cyber fraud and criminality and the numbers for the past year, right? It's surpassing the physical criminality. If you think about how many law enforcement, policemen, military people you have in the reality versus the number of cyber security people, right? It's ridiculous. Obviously, when you look at the economy scale of Amazon versus the physical shop, so that's not gonna be 1-to-1, right? But the only way out of there is obviously, as Paul was saying, right? Use the technology, use AI, and use automation where possible. There's no way you're gonna correlate two different signals which are low to a high by yourself, unless you use clever platforms to do it for you. There's also a question there from Vincent, right, about what application we are using, what is the cost of solution you are proposing, right? So again, really depends, and I kind of reply, right? Depends on you. We are trying to be vendor agnostic, right? If your skill set are with Checkpoint or with, you're using Kato for SASE or Trellix or somebody else, right? We don't tend to change that tech stack, right? If you have a skill set there, use it. As Paul was saying, right? The risk appetite and how much you want to spend on security, it's the key differentiator. We can deploy 2 firewalls so you are protected against 0-day vulnerability, right? We can put them in sync in serial. So if one vendor gets breached with 0 days on your firewall, then the second, probably you have the 2 0-day vulnerability on the same day is very low, right? But that's going to cost you a lot of money. Same on identity, right? You need to think about the scale between the usability versus the security, right? How much security we can put in before your developers are going to just jump the ship and say, I don't want to do anything in this enterprise because I cannot even reach Google. But the cost of solution is really depending on what you try to achieve there.
Great, fantastic. Let's open it up to the floor. Are there any other questions? If there are, maybe type them into the chat box and we'll do our best to respond to them.
This is actually first webinar when nobody dropped. So thank you all for reaching the end, right?
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Just on that. Oh, there we go.
Well, I think that's for you.
You're on mute, Paul.
So yeah, that question there, that's a question that that we just asked already, Mark, isn't it?
Yeah, it's no, it's from Dara. So like we do see a good integration between the SOC, traditional SOC and SIEM platform, and the new providers like CrowdStrike, right? So you can integrate them, right? You can push the signals between those. It's always good to have multiple vendors as well. Again, we see this trend, everything with Microsoft, everything with AWS, or everything with Google Cloud, right? There are vendors, like the new vendors, like a CrowdStrike you mentioned there, or other of our partners, right, which do have cross-platform and very innovative, Viz.io, for example, right, solutions, and they can nicely integrate with the traditional SIEMs we already have in place. I don't know, Paul, if you want to add anything to that.
No, look, you hit the nail on the head there, Mikhail. That's exactly it. Yeah, there is a convergence, but effectively you need to get to that same place where you have complete visibility. Number one, you have the ability to do your analytics. Number two, and thirdly, the platform has to be able to do automation, orchestration, and effect change. Because the R in response nowadays has to be a capital R. Previously, R would have been, would notify, or you get notified of an incident and you would have to remediate yourself. Whereas now the R is actually, we'd actually do something. Is that quarantine a device? Is it isolate a user? Is it put an emergency firewall change request in to block set of IPs?
Yeah. And maybe different angle on that question there, right? If you have a SIEM which is not capable to ingest data across the platform, right? Get rid of it. That's my very clear message. Use the one which is, right? If you cannot integrate or it's too expensive to integrate logs, it's not a SOC in 2024. Get rid of it. Sorry, SIEM, not SOC, SIEM.
Great, thank you, gents. So there was a question from Vincent around pricing. What I'd suggest there is obviously we have standardized pricing, but it's a lot of these solutions can be different based on client requirements. So I'd suggest that we set up a separate session to discuss that with you directly. If there are any questions, feel free to reach out directly to your account manager. And as I mentioned at the start today, we'll make available the slides presented today, and also a recording of the session. They should be available to you tomorrow. Other than that, all that remains, I think, to say thank you for joining us. We hope you found it useful, and we look forward to seeing you on another webinar very soon. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good day.
Thank you.